Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. In-person event, talking to the CFOs, the masters of the finance and the money here on this day, on a theme which is, I think, stunningly beautiful and challenging at the same time, mastering change. So what I'll do is, I see the CFOs as the guys who manage money and finance in the short and medium term for the existing businesses to not only keep the wheels of businesses running, but also contribute to the profitability of the company. So that's in the short term as the business in which they are engaged and that business goes on. But at the same time, the CFOs also look into the future for identifying investments which might bring money, profits in times to come. That requires a different perspective in my judgment, the perspective from the long term. So when we talk about the changes, I think we should look at from the two perspectives, that what is happening now in the macroeconomic environment, in the policy environment, in the business world, in the financial world, to see whether we are doing a great job by mastering the changes, identifying them very quickly on the spur of the moment as it takes place, and then adjust our sort of tools and the instruments and the measures accordingly. And for the second one, to identify the long-term trends and what's going to happen in times to come. So I'll just do it in two perspectives. So on the short-term side or the medium-term side, what you see today is a very large change. Some of that, I think Amol also identified so you're seeing the world buffeted by inflation. For the first time, this kind of level of inflation. Americans had inflation of 10% or so in 80s and 70s. After 40 years, they are somewhere close to that level. There is disruption in the global trade and the production systems, thanks to wars which have taken place or taking place, still going on. Also some of the geopolitical tensions which you see here. That is making a lot of sort of changes. For example, just take one. The world had got used to sort of living on at about, let us say, 100 million tons, 100 million barrels a day of the crude oil, right? And there was a certain system where it is produced, where it's purchased, or for that matter, let us say the grains, the wheat, etc., where it is produced and where it is taken and consumed. But this war has disrupted that, raising questions about the global supply chains of commodities, not of the goods, and has introduced a lot of volatility in terms of the pricing of crude oil, wheat, and other commodities. So you see the crude crossing about $138 a barrel at some point in time, back again. There's a lot of adjustments are taking place. You saw the COVID-19 situation being handled in a certain way, especially by the developed countries, the advanced countries, where they pumped in so much of money for consumption to the people that something which they thought will never happen, the inflation, took wings. The helicopter money distributed by the US government in the European countries, as well as the gush of liquidity unleashed by the Fed, made the inflation. They were all desiring that somehow we should be able to get 2% inflation, and instead they got now 10% inflation. So these things have taken place, they're still playing out. They affect us all. They affect global growth, they affect global inflation, they affect global trade, and affects us all as well. So you're seeing even in India, The growth volatility, COVID, we saw about 6.5% contraction, first time again after 40 years. We have bounced back in last year. We are doing better in nominal terms even this year. But on the whole, we are still very barely recouped the losses of 2021. The 3 years average, if you take, the 3 years average post 19 is only about 1.5%. Even when you take the average, that 7% would be this year, and maybe 7% next year, the 5-year average would be barely about 4%. So how do you read the growth situation? Are we likely to return to a very robust investment and the high growth scenario in times to come? Or after the effect of the pandemic, etc., are over, then we will be more or less getting back to what we saw in 1920 or 1819, a low growth 4 to 5% kind of situation? That's a fairly good question to discuss and debate and see which way the camel will turn. Will we have higher growth, or we will have a lot of decisions which you will take and the government will take about the policy will determine that. Right. Similarly, let us see the inflation situation. So, inflation in India, I don't think we measure it very accurately. Focusing too much on the consumer prices is not a good idea. That's not the whole story about inflation. We see the wholesale inflation going around 15%, but we tend to agree. I think businesses can't avoid or ignore the wholesale inflation, because most of businesses are actually affected by the wholesale inflation, not the consumer price inflation. There are some consumer focused companies, but many are the ones which are focused on the. So it's better to take a, let us say, GDP deflator as the right kind of inflation signal. And GDP deflator last year was 11% for 21-22. And this year is also likely to be somewhere close to about 9 to 10%. So we are facing very high inflation situation as well. Now, how do you adjust your monetary policy tools, the interest rate, supplies, etc.? That I am sure you would be watching today. Again, there is a policy action. But remember, there is a little bit of a policy conflict in the monetary authority's mind. You want to deal with inflation, but at the same time, you don't want to upset the growth, or you don't want to upset the government's borrowing program, which is very large. When you have 18 to 19 lakh crores of borrowing, which is about 6 to 6.5% of GDP, you have a very high problem at your hands, right? And central bank, which normally in other countries is not tasked with the job of managing government's borrowing, has to manage it here. Right, and that creates a bit of moral conflict for the central bank also to do it. So I think if you short-term situation, if you take a kind of call, because that affects your interest rates for borrowings, you do it, that affects your liquidity, your investment opportunities for your treasury management and all. So that seems to me that the global situation seems to be headed for a kind of recession, because the great stimulus which was provided is being withdrawn. The fiscal side has virtually taken it off. On the monetary side also, there is now that tendency where it has peaked and it's getting over. And as a result of this global situation, I think there would be, in the advanced countries at least, there would be recessionary trends. You may not get to contraction for long, but certainly you would be at a very lower rate of growth, or to some extent minus growth as well, right? So that is the growth situation. This will bring down the inflation. There is no doubt. I think if you see from 1 year from now, the global inflation would certainly be somewhere close to 3 to 4%, if not less. So that seems to be a fairly. But what it will do is that it will destroy the trade. global demand will also get destroyed. So our export opportunities, which got last year very good sort of boost because the global export, will continue to you are seeing for last 4 months, there is a export slowdown. From $40 billion a month, we are about to 35. And if the situation remains what looks like, we might end up going towards $30 billion by the time we reach in February, March. So that will impact many of the businesses where you may not be able to have export demand. Our imports are unfortunately much more inflexible. We have enormous energy dependence on the world, so unlikely. And I think we should also keep in mind that the oil producers have also learned the art of managing the price. They are not going to overproduce to see that the oil production in the world or the oil prices go down massively. I don't think that would be happening. So maybe in the range of about $90 to $100 per barrel is what you would see as the kind of prices coming. And if we have so much of energy dependence, our import bill, likewise, the other big vulnerability which we have built in our import side is the big dependence we have on the electronic side, the digital economy and digital society devices and all. This is becoming much and more and more. We're making some exports of mobile phones and etc. That's fine, but on the net, our electronics balance is very, very negative, and it's likely to get worsened because we are not technologically very good in producing these devices which keep on changing for the time being. So that's the other big vulnerability which worries me, and I see the trade imbalance, which is last month it was very high at $31 billion. That's extraordinarily high. It may come down to $25 billion in times to come, but still it will be very high. You can see probably $250 billion of trade deficit in this year, which will put pressure on our external value of the money. And I don't see rupee getting strengthened. These volatility which you see on day-to-day basis perhaps are on the day-to-day basis type, but the long-term trend, considering our fundamental, and there is another factor which is going to impact the rupee in times to come. Over the years, we have built a lot of external liabilities. So we have a lot of external commercial borrowings, other kind of borrowings, and also the FDI, etc. So our net external investment balance is something in the range of about $1,200 billion if you exclude the reserves. Reserves are the only foreign assets which we have in the country. So now servicing this takes about $40 billion a year, and this is likely to grow up. So taking all these factors together in the short term to medium terms, next 2 to 3 years, I see the rupee will remain under a bit of a pressure. So that's my take on the short term. Let me now spend a little bit time on the longer time, on the investment side, where you look at it. There are 4 or 5 mega trends, I think, which we need to recognize when we take about the investment decisions, which by definition are long term. You're investing for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years kind of thing. One major trend is that the population now, the global population is stabilizing. By 2050, it's expected to be sort of peaking at about 10 billion people in the world, and thereafter start declining. Remember, in 1800, the global population was only 1 billion. In 1900, it was 1.6 billion. And when we opened this account in 2000 here, the global population was somewhere close to 4.7 or 4.8 billion. That was the rise. And now we are still going from about 5 billion to about 10 billion maximum. And that is where you see the rate of growth is declining. And at 2050, global population, including Indian population also, the stability at about 1.65 crore is where we see the billion, we see the population stabilizing in India. That has profound changes for the businesses. If the population will not be growing, you would not be requiring more houses, schools, products, even food of the kind of growth which was required in last many years will not be there. So instead of focusing on the quantity side in times to come for feeding the global population, or managing their other needs like houses, machines, and other kind of things, it might make sense to focus more on the quality side of it. How do you improve the quality of those things? Quality of houses, quality of food for that matter, and otherwise. So that's one big trend I think we should watch for, take into account the future investment decision. The second big change, I think, and many of you are actually into that, is the onset of the digital economy and sort of maturing or peaking or downsizing of the industrial economy to that. The agricultural economy peaked 50, 60, 100 years back, and thereafter it's not growing. So agriculture, which used to employ so many people, doesn't employ anymore, and it produces still much more than what it used to produce. It's happening. So the same for the industrial economy now. In times to come. So industrial goods, which is basically using minerals and the fossil fuels to produce the industrial good for the times to come, I think is now where we are sort of seeing the peaking of it. And the digital economy, on the other hand, is advancing. So you see the digital economy advancing on the social side, you see on the businesses, more and more services being produced, new technologies, databases, you see the new blockchain cryptography technologies advancing, which is very different. These are two different worlds. Database technology is what you see in the sense of the industrial. So you have banks, central banks, insurance companies, everyone doing the database management to deliver services, where the blockchain cryptography technology would be more individual oriented, where individuals decide where you want to invest, where you want to interact, how do you hold your asset, which services you want to enjoy or deliver, etc. That's a very profound change in times to come. So digital economy as such. And in digital economy, the blockchain cryptography technology, or Web 3 and Web 5, which we see are likely to sort of decide on the course of where the better investment lies. The third big change to my mind, which is very much there, is the sense of individual coming or becoming at this center of the scheme of things. We had villages in the agricultural economy when the village was virtually like one single family, and it was producing for itself, consuming, and taking, and the economy was basically the local economy, the village economy. And in the industrial economy, the society became the family oriented, nuclear family. So nuclear family was the unit. But as you see now in the digital economy, the individuals become the center point, and that is likely to make tremendous implications for both men and women. I think in times to come, the women get the agency and the individuality much more, because they are overcoming The earlier constraints of primarily engaging in producing people, children and sort of doing homework, now both of them, when the population is stabilizing from the average of 5 or 6 children per only about 60, 70 years back to now an average of 1 to 2 children, there is the occupation of women in that activity is going to be much, much smaller. And the kind of digital economy changes which are coming up in the form of working from anywhere, you don't have to go to factory, or you don't have to go to any particular office or something, will allow the women to be productive in times to come. And therefore, in times to come, both men and women with an individual entity, and so you create the finances, you create the asset, you create the working space from that point of view. And I think this would be a very, very big change which will drive. I think I am running out of time, but I just want to make a short comment on two more changes which are going to inform the big probably investment decisions in times to come. The fourth one is this energy transition. I think that's the big theme for times to come. The last 100 years literally have been spent on the fossil fuels, the coal, the oil, the gas, and the like. But now humans have mastered the way to produce energy directly from the sun or the wind. The natural forces can be harnessed to produce the energy which is required. And this now, I think of about 19 billion tons of minerals which we extract from the earth, today, literally 15 billion is the fossil fuel, right? So that is going to change. In next 50 years, you might see the fossil fuel composition coming down substantially. And so whoever invests in the new energy, new source of energy, and design machines for use of that new energy will be the one which will be doing better. And lastly, I think this is the big environmental change which we are going to see as a result of all that which I have discussed. So in 2050, you can see an environmental economy or a world economy which is far more sustainable. If you go to 2100, probably you will have a very, very sustainable kind of economy and society in the world. And in beyond 2100, 22nd century, perhaps you see the reversal of what the access which we have done to the world, and it becomes much and much better. So where do you invest? All this probably might come into play in your mind for making decisions. CFO, to my mind, is CEO plus. So CFO has to do a job which CEO does plus what it manages finances, because you can't manage finance unless you understand the real economy and the real changes which are taking place, which is mostly the job of the CEO. So you can't invest in technology, you can't invest in the new investment proposals, etc., unless you understand them. So all the best to you, CEO Plus, for a great future ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful keynote that you shared.